Yeah, they did. Yeah,
Sorry, we need to take advantage. We need to take advantage of this time.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Well, I don't see my job really to put my mark on a particular band or artist's sound in the sense of, say, in the way where Spector had his own sound or whatever. Well, Phil Spector had his own sound. I would say that my thing really is capturing honestly a band or an artist at a particular point in their career and getting a really good kind of oral snapshot of that particular artist at that point. So I kind of, you know, I don't try and, you know, make a band like Blur sound like the Cranberries or vice versa. It's impossible. You know, you're trying to capture honestly the sound of a band. And that's the way I see it really as far as production's concerned. So, and also I'm working for them, they're not working for me. When the band asks me to produce them, you know, I am kind of, you know, I'm being employed by them and their record label obviously. And so I kind of see my part really as doing a service, and I don't really kind of feel that I should impose a particular sound on them, no. Well, I don't know, I think producers are notoriously not very good at mixing. You know, I mean, there has been times in the past, you know, to kind of form producers guilds, and you know, and I used to go to one back in the 80s, you know, and I don't know, producers tend to be a little bit protective about their own work and everything. You know, no one wants to take work from someone else or whatever. You know, we don't kind of all meet in the pub, you know, and go for a meal together or anything like that. And I think each person's quite individual about how they kind of feel, how protective they are towards the work they do. And obviously, you know, for me, my calling card is the records that I've made. So that's why on my site, you know, I do tend to kind of focus, you know, on sharing with people who might not be aware. You know, they might be aware of the work I've done with the Smiths and with Blur or something, but they might not be aware of some other great records that I've worked on that I'm just equally as proud of, but for whatever reason they haven't, you know, been as big hits or whatever. So I do try and kind of surprise people by saying, oh, you know, this record by, I don't know, Tiger or an American band called Cupcakes that I worked with years ago. You know, there's these records that one-offs that I really enjoyed making, but they didn't, you know, really kind of sell greatly. So it's a way for me to kind of at the same time just remind people of some other work that I've done that I'm proud of. I mean, if obviously you make a record with someone and it is a huge hit, I mean, I was lucky to have that, say, the Cranberries, then obviously there is something that I have done with their sound that is then kind of thought of as their sound, and then obviously in those instances it's better for the band most probably to do their next record with a producer, the same producer rather, and which did happen with me and the Cranberries, and also happened fortunately with Blur as well. But I think you're judged really on how successful it is as to whether you've got the band sound. And if you might have done a record that you really did feel captured the band sound, but if it's not commercially a hit, then there's going to be pressure on them, or they might feel it naturally themselves that they haven't quite achieved what they wanted to set out to achieve. So they will try something different on the next record. So it's not just a question of whether you feel you've captured the band sound as best as it can be. It can often just be, you might well have done a really good job on it, but it just, for whatever reason, hasn't been commercially a hit enough. So therefore, there'll be pressure for them, you know, to go and try someone else. Well, it's different. I mean, obviously with the Smiths and with Blur, there was actually a natural tendency to try and stretch out and use the studio a little bit more. You know, I mean, obviously on Strange Ways, for instance, there's a track on that album that hasn't got any guitar on it at all, and it was all keyboards. You know, the first track, A Rush and a Push, and obviously there was more kind of touches of strings and things that they would never have wanted to have done on the earlier work. So that was a band naturally involving, and then obviously at the same time you hopefully, if you've got, you know, you're continuing to work with them, then you can go on that journey with them. Same thing happened with Blur in the sense that, you know, I made 5 albums with them, but the 5th album, the Blur album, actually is kind of perceived as being a bit of a lo-fi album. So it was kind of thinking backwards, kind of stripping things off again and taking things back to basics. You know, so it's not always getting bigger and bigger. Sometimes you've got to take things back, and I think I did that to a certain degree also with the new Cranberries album, the last one that came out, because I felt there was an intimacy on the first album that kind of got missed as they got bigger and bigger and played bigger and bigger stadia. I think they were always thinking subconsciously about how we're going to play these songs to the big world, and so they were writing songs that were trying to fill stages rather than writing songs that perhaps people could connect with. So my feeling on that last record was to try again, strip things down a little bit and get back to a more intimate sound. So it's horses for courses, really. There's no set rules, and that's a great thing about working in music. You know, you just have to be hopefully on the same wavelength as someone else when they desire to do something, and if you can, and you can focus and get on the same, you know, on the same page, as we say, then hopefully the result will be a good one that pleases everyone. Oh no, I'm very proud of it. I mean, you know, I mean, everyone needs a good calling card, as it were, and a bit of good fortune. And obviously, for me, my major step up initially was having the great fortune to meet the Smiths early on in their career, and also in my career. So that was, you know, that was a great thing to be involved with, and obviously it's fantastic that to this day those records that we made together in the 80s are still highly rated and, you know, regarded. You know, then I had the other next fortunate step was then, you know, obviously when the Smiths did break up, and I stepped into, you know, kind of co-write with Morrissey. And to this day, I really thought that that was just going to be like a small, you know, kind of tiff between Johnny and Morrissey, and that they were going to reform again within 6 months. You know, I was kind of just thinking, okay, we might do a one-off Morrissey solo record, and then he'll go back to the Smiths again. But obviously, as we all know, that didn't happen. And so, you know, one thing leads to another, really. I mean, you know, and then obviously, you know, I had the good fortune of working with Blur, and roughly at the same time the Cranberries, completely different bands from each other, but, you know, they all both had their own successes in their own different ways. And so when you've achieved that, then obviously, you know, you can look back with a certain sense of satisfaction and say, you know, it was a job well done. But you'd never kind of completely rest on your laurels. And, you know, because I've done records that are, you know, kind of big sellers, as it were, I'm still interested also in working with discovering new upcoming stuff. I mean, it's like the 2 bands you mentioned earlier. You know, I'm still very keen on working on new things and you know, getting new blood coming through, really. Well, I mean, bands had more time in the past because there were kind of healthier record sales, especially when I think about the kind of alternative indie sphere, which is obviously the market that I kind of specialise in as such. I think that market, more than any other market, has been hit mostly by the internet piracy thing that's happened over the last 10, you know, 12 years, whatever. And that really saddens me greatly because, you know, I mean, there was a time back in the 80s that a band could bring out an album, and if it was, or a single, and if it was getting a bit of play on John Peel or Kid Jensen or, you know, Janice Long in the evenings on Radio 1, people would check it out and buy it, and those records would actually sell a few thousand copies that then made it viable for a bigger label or for that independent label then to say, right, here's a budget for an album, and when the album came out you might sell, you know, between, let's say, 50, 60,000 copies. Now it's very, very hard to achieve because the kind of student fan base, kind of 15 to 25-year-olds, the ones that are computer savvy, don't want to spend their money on recorded music anymore. They'll go to festivals and spend money on buying lots of different festival tickets, but they won't spend any money on recorded music. So this is why it's very hard for new bands to get off the ground, because any festival headliner, most of them really are lucky they made their name before the internet became a real major problem. And that's why all the headliners that we're going to see for years and years, it will be Coldplay, Muse, Kasabian, you know, all the bands that got through just before the internet thing became a problem. Where's the new blood coming from? And that won't happen until we protect recorded music, because recorded music is the heartbeat of the whole industry. It's not just gigs. The gigs, you know, when you go and see a band won't pack out a venue just because they're great live. They pack out a venue normally because they've got a record that's getting played on Radio 1 or XFM or whatever. And that comes first. The recorded music thing is the thing that kickstarts it. And unfortunately, it's not been protected enough. Just got to make the internet service providers more, and Google and those people more liable for what they do. They're handling stolen goods, basically, or they're pointing people towards stolen goods. And until it stops, it's not, you know, we're not hiding to nothing. I mean, bands like Live from Film and Curran the Wolf Notes, I remember when I first met them, that was about 3 years ago, and that was when the internet thing first started really, you know, kind of becoming a pain. That band 10 years ago, or 12 years ago, would have had a record deal, no problem. They found it really hard to get a deal because that, you know, bands will kind of get in. I think bands also got kind of waylaid by the internet. They always thought, let's do a Lily Allen or Arctic Monkeys, you know, put a record out on the internet and we'll make us stars. Well, everyone takes it, but no one's paying for it. How's that gonna work? How are you gonna get your money in to make your next session? You know, pay a producer, pay an engineer, pay for the studio time. And 10 years ago, everyone was going mad about MySpace, saying it's the way forward. Well, we all know now that's complete rubbish. So, you know, I think I've been saying it for years, you know, it's not cool to download this and download that. And even the NME journalists who have been saying for years, yeah, download this, download that, give it to the man. Even they are beginning to realise now that they've got fuck all to write about because there's not much happening. It's pardon my language, but, you know, I'm quite angry about it. Their attitude was, you know, it stank. And not only now they stop actually saying at the bottom of their album reviews, download this. I think they now say, listen to this or listen to that, but they don't say download anymore because they know that what they were doing was just encouraging people not to properly buy music. I think you've got to be true to your heart when you're making a record with an act. You can't just worry about whether it's going to be the kind of sound that's going to get played on Radio 1 or whatever, or, you know, for me, it's really a question of pleasing the artist and myself. And obviously, you want to make sure that, you know, the record company aren't feeling, you know, suddenly you've taken the artist and taken it to something else. You want the record company to be happy too, but primarily, I feel that the reason why people get signed in the first place is there's something good about them, something original about them, which is interesting. And if it gets kind of homogenized or kind of, you know, sometimes being directed too much towards what the market wants rather than what they're true to, then that's when you can get things that kind of get blanded out and so on and are not so interesting. So for me, I never really think about the big market, as it were. I mean, when I did, for instance, I Predict a Riot with the Kaiser Chiefs, you know, I did that as a test session for them to hopefully get signed by Be Unique, the label. You know, I wasn't worrying about whether it was going to be a top 10 hit or anything. It was just like, let's show the band off as best as we can. Let's just do this track and do it. And, you know, as we know, that for that particular period in history, the Kaiser Chiefs will play to death on radio. Everyone loved it. But I didn't go out of my way to make a radio hit single. I mean, obviously, I thought it could be a single. That's why we chose it to work on. But it wasn't, you know, I wasn't letting that dictate the sound. The sound was naturally what the band sounded like when they were all put together and played together. Primarily, I'm a record producer. I don't really write much. I wrote more when I was young because I was playing. You know, I was a musician before I became a recording engineer. So that side of me kind of is there somewhere, but I don't really tap into it so much anymore. As from a writing point of view, I'm focusing more now on production. But yeah, I think, you know, when you're writing a song, you sometimes do have an image straight away, sound-wise, how you imagine it sounding. I mean, this is why bands often make demos that have a certain vibe to them that it's really hard to break away from, because obviously as they wrote that song, they wrote it with a particular reverb on the voice or a drum pattern that they had on the drum machine, and it dictates kind of a sound that the song wants to go with, you know, and you do find sometimes that when you're writing a song, you know, people will get an interesting sound first of all on a synthesizer or with the guitar pedals, and with that sound that takes them where they go with, you know, the direction they go with writing the song. So the two things are very intertwined. But then having said that, sometimes you can write a song just sitting there with a guitar, acoustic guitar and a voice, and you just sing it and you don't worry about it. It depends, it really does. That's the great thing about music, there are no set rules, you know. But sometimes the relationship between sound and writing can be a very strong influence at the very, very germ of the idea. I mean, it depends. I mean, some artists will come to me with, I mean, with Peter, you know, on that last record, there was some things that I got that were just literally sketches of him singing it very, very rough into, you know, a computer, you know, just, and then so that kind of left me with a clear template to kind of come up with other things, you know, and fortunately it worked. But sometimes you can go off on a tangent and it doesn't work. But fortunately, in that case, I think we managed to get a good team together working on that record. Whereas other tracks, you know, like Arcady, pretty much is how we always wrote it, you know, with a few overdubs on it, obviously. But it depends, you know, it really does depend. As I say, that's why I love working on albums, because sometimes you can be really like a wallflower. You just don't get in the way. You just let things go by. And you think, great, that's all working great. And then sometimes you've got to step in there and go, whoa, wait a minute, we've got to do this. You know what I mean? So it's, as I say, it's horses for courses, really. Well, I mean, art is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? I mean, you know, it's like sometimes you can go to a modern gallery and you'll see something that some people will think is absolute genius and some people think is absolute rubbish. You know, it's just you know, music is a great art, and it's something that I feel very protective and very, you know, very proud of, you know, especially I think with this kind of the history of music and modern pop music in this country, when you consider the size of the country to America, how we've always managed to provide, you know, a great number of musicians and writers and things. And I think that, you know, you can't really measure art really, because as I say, there'll be one little pocket of people who will look at something and really, really love it, and the general public will listen to it and go, oh, that's disgusting, you know. It depends, you know. So it's how long is a piece of rope, I think, how much one appreciates art, and when art becomes popular art, and when it becomes, I don't know, an acquired taste. It's really hard to kind of answer that question, to be honest.